Hey everyone, I'm Keegs, and today we're going to be talking about the entirety of the Star Wars universe timeline and all the events that take place during and in between each of the movies. I also linked a spreadsheet in the description below that's going to list all of the major events for your reference that I am going to be updating regularly as new things come out. Just some quick terminology, BBY stands for Before the Battle of Yavin, which is episode 4 when Luke blew up the Death Star, and it's a common benchmark for judging the timelines of other events in the Star Wars universe, and notably ABY stands for After the Battle of Yavin, so anything that took place after episode 4. But there's a lot to talk about, so let's jump into it. So, thousands of years ago, before Episode 1, we had the Old Republic, and this is where Jedi-Sith wars took place, and it was before the rule of 2 for the Sith, so there ended up being a lot of infighting and backstabbing among each other. Then, kind of an unspecified amount of time later, we get to the High Republic era, which was said to be the height of the Jedi Order around 82 BBY, and this is where Jedi were expanding and settling a lot of disputes very peacefully. And just for reference, Yoda was born in 896 BBY, and coincidentally, Palpatine was born in 82 BBY. The Acolyte, which is a new Star Wars series that's coming out, is said to take place at 132 BBY, so about 50 years before Palpatine actually was born even. That's about all I'm going to focus on those two eras though, since there's not a ton of material surrounding those eras, and I really want to focus on the eras that the movies take place in, so from episode 1 to episode 9. This is the Galactic Republic era, where the Jedi are starting to become a little bit more complacent with their power, and they're getting heavily involved in politics and starting to lose focus of what's actually important in studying the Force. Count Dooku was born in roughly 102 BBY, and the time between 92 BBY and 22 BBY is explored in the novel Star Wars Dooku Jedi Lost. Then in the Tales of the Jedi episode Justice, we saw a Dooku who to me looks to be around 40-ish years old or so, which would put this around 50 to 60 BBY, and the next episode with him being about 10 years older, putting it at about 40 to 50 BBY. Anakin Skywalker is actually born on Tatooine in 41 BBY. At pretty much the same time as this, the book Star Wars Padawan takes place in 40 BBY, which follows a 16-year-old Obi-Wan Kenobi, followed by the book Master and Apprentice set in 39 BBY following Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. In roughly 35 BBY, the Tales of the Jedi episode Life and Death, we see Ahsoka Tano being born, and just a couple years later, in 33 BBY, Cassian Andor is born. Then we get to our first big milestone, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, at 32 BBY, so Anakin is now about 9 years old at this point. At the same time as this movie, in 32 BBY, the final Tales of the Jedi Dooku episode, The Sith Lords, takes place, where Dooku kills Yaddle after foregoing Qui-Gon's funeral. The novel Queen's Peril, where Padme becomes Queen of Naboo, is also set over this period of time, and then in 28 BBY, the novel Queen's Shadow, where Padme becomes a senator, takes place. And then we hit our next milestone of Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, set in 22 BBY, or 10 years after the events of Episode 1. Then, very shortly after that, is the novel Star Wars Brotherhood, which follows Anakin and Obi-Wan as the Jedi are made official generals in the Grand Army of the Republic, which leads to the Clone Wars movie where Anakin gains Ahsoka as a Padawan in 22 BBY. A year later, in 21 BBY, the Tales of the Jedi episode Practice Makes Perfect takes place, and then Ahsoka ends up leaving the Jedi Order in early 19 BBY. Over the 3 years from 22 BBY to 19 BBY, we have the entirety of the Clone Wars animated series, which introduces many characters such as Ahsoka, Asajj Ventress, Cad Bane, and more. It also brings back Darth Maul and tells a large portion of his story since we last saw him in Episode 1. A lot happens in 19 BBY, including the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy books, which take place from about 20 to 19 BBY, and the novel Dark Disciple, which follows Asajj Ventress and Jedi Master Quinlan Vos as they attempt and fail to assassinate Dooku. And that leads us right into Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which also happens in 19 BBY, or 3 years after Episode 2, beginning the era of the Galactic Empire. There are a ton of times when Order 66 is shown, so every time you see Order 66, you can just know that happened in 19 BBY. Luke and Leia are, of course, also born in 19 BBY. Right after Order 66 though, we have the animated series The Bad Batch, which still takes place in 19 BBY after Order 66 though, which follows an elite group of clones that defect from the Empire. In 18 BBY, we have the Ahsoka novel, or the Tales of the Jedi episode Resolve, which show Ahsoka starting to get involved with the rebellion, but she's not fully part of it yet. In 17 BBY, the novel Catalyst takes place where Galen Erso started constructing the plans for the Death Star. In 14 BBY, or 5 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith, the novel Lords of the Sith take place, which introduce a Twi'lek from Ryloth named Cham Syndulla as he chases down Vader and Palpatine who have been stranded on a planet. In 14 BBY, we also have the novel Tarkin, which shows his rise to becoming a Grand Moff. Still in 14 BBY, we have the canon video game Jedi Fallen Order, which follow the former Jedi Padawan Cal Kestis reconnect with the Force and become a Jedi Knight. In 13 BBY, the novel Star Wars Most Wanted comes out, which follows a young Han Solo and his accomplice Kira, who try to get out of the syndicate they're in, and Han ends up joining the Imperial Navy as a pilot. In 11 BBY, we have the novel A New Dawn, which follows the former Jedi Padawan Kanan Jarrus as he meets the daughter of Cham Syndulla, Hera Syndulla, and they team up to start fighting back against the Empire. This is also about the same time as parts of the first Thrawn novel, which takes place between 11 and 2 BBY. In 10 BBY, we have the movie Solo, where Han Solo has now deserted the Imperial Navy and he meets Chewie and Lando. In 9 BBY, or 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, we have the series Obi-Wan Kenobi, which follows Obi-Wan reconnect with the Force and face Darth Vader once again. It's also where the video game Jedi Survivor is going to take place, which is a sequel to Fallen Order. In 5 BBY, the first season of Star Wars Rebels, which introduces Kanan, Hera, Zeb, Sabine, and Ezra Bridger, takes place. This show essentially runs pretty close to 0 BBY, with an epilogue in 4 ABY, where Sabine and Ahsoka go off to search for Ezra after he went missing. 5 BBY is also the same time as the series Andor, which will presumably lead right into Rogue One. In 3 BBY is the novel Leia, Princess of Alderaan, which follows Leia getting involved in the rebellion for the first time. In 2 BBY, Thrawn Alliances takes place, which follows his relationship with Darth Vader. And in 1 BBY, the novel Thrawn Treason shows how Thrawn is trying to ensure funding for his specialized TIE Defender program. This actually takes place concurrently as the final season of Star Wars Rebels, just as the liberation of Lothal is about to take place. Then in 0 BBY, we have the novel Rebel Rising, which shows the early life of Jyn Erso, the daughter of Galen Erso, up to the events of Rogue One, which leads right into the movie Rogue One, and then the next major milestone, Episode 4 A New Hope at 0 BBY, or 19 years after the events of Episode 3. Now we're moving into the ABY nomenclature, or after the Battle of Yavin. There actually isn't a ton of material set during the events of the original trilogy, though there are some comics, but I'm not going to really get into those too much here. But we have in 0 ABY, Heir to the Jedi novel, which follows Luke shortly after he destroyed the Death Star and the rebellion is looking for a new base. And then in 3 ABY, we have Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Followed up very quickly a year later in 4 ABY with Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. The Galactic Empire has fallen, and we have made it to the New Republic era. There's actually quite a few books here. From 4 to 5 ABY, we have Alphabet Squadron Trilogy, which is about some new pilots of the New Republic, and we have the Aftermath Trilogy that focuses on events after Episode 6, such as the Empire trying to hold on to any power they have left. The book Lost Stars also ends in 5 ABY, though it starts in 11 BBY, so it takes place over 16 years and follows some aspiring Imperial pilots. In 9 ABY, or 5 years after the events of Episode 6 when the Empire fell, we have the show The Mandalorian, and we concurrently have the Book of Boba Fett. The Book of Boba Fett flashbacks take place in the 5 years between 4 ABY and 9 ABY. Also in 9 ABY, there will be the Skeleton Crew show, which hasn't aired at the time of me making this video, but it's where it's going to fall when it comes out. We're also getting the Ahsoka show that's going to take place about the same time as The Mandalorian, which is going to follow Ahsoka and Sabine, likely searching for Ezra. In 21 ABY, or 17 years after Episode 6, we have the novel Shadow of the Sith, which focuses on Luke and Lando saving a young Rey and her parents from a Sith cultist. In 28 ABY, we have the novel Bloodlines, which follows Leia and her time as a senator debating with people that want to bring the Empire back, and they stumble into the first hints of the First Order. In 31 ABY, we have the novel Force Collector, which follows a young boy named Carr that discovers he's Force sensitive and is just trying to figure himself out. In 34 ABY, we have the animated show Resistance, which follows a pilot who's tasked with gaining intel on the First Order. Then again in 34 ABY, or 30 years after the events of Episode 6, we have our next milestone with Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which leads directly into Episode 8, The Last Jedi, also set in 34 ABY. So in 34 ABY, right after they escape from Crate in Episode 8, we have the novel Resistance Reborn, showing how the Resistance gains support. Then we get a year break, and finally we have in 35 ABY, Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. And there you have it, a complete Star Wars timeline over the 67-year period in between Episode 1 and Episode 9. I'm sure there might be a few things I left out here and there, so if you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll get back to you. There are also going to be more Star Wars shows that come out in the future, and I will make timeline videos for those as well, so you know exactly where they fit in the overall timeline, and I will also update my spreadsheet so you can also reference that. I hope you were able to learn something new, or at least clear something up for yourself, and you feel much more confident going into all these shows and movies, but I'm Keegs, and I will catch you all next time for some more Star Wars content.